The email wasn't meant for me. I only saw it because Travis left his laptop open on the kitchen counter that morning, a rare slip in his otherwise perfect choreography of secrecy. I was rinsing my coffee mug when the subject line caught my eye. Updated guest list. Tuesday gala. My name wasn't on it. 17 spouses, secretaries, and associates had carefully assigned seats at a marble table under chandeliers that probably cost more than my annual salary. But where it should have said Savannah Mitchell, the space beside Travis's name was blank. He hadn't forgotten. He had erased me. When I scrolled further, I saw the note he'd written to the event planner. My wife will not be attending. Please ensure place settings reflect this. The sting of it spread hot across my chest, as though someone had poured wine down the front of my blouse. My birthday humiliation at Chateau Blanc should have been lesson enough, but no. Travis always needed new ways to remind me that in his world, I was an accessory easily removed, like a scuffed pair of shoes. That night, when he came home, I waited for him to mention the gala. He didn't. He poured his whiskey, kissed the top of my head like I was a dutiful child, and said only, "Don't forget, I'll be home late Tuesday." "Isn't Tuesday the investor gala?" I asked, keeping my voice light, casual. His eyes flicked toward me, sharp as glass. "It's not your kind of event. You wouldn't be comfortable. Not welcome, not invited, not comfortable." The way men like Travis sanitize cruelty with polished vocabulary. I wanted to ask him if comfort was the reason he'd deleted my name from the list, or if humiliation tasted sweeter when it came premeditated. Instead, I set down my fork and smiled like he expected, the way I had 100 times before. But my hands shook under the tablecloth, clenching my grandmother's emerald earrings in my pocket. She used to say, "Wear these when you need courage. They'll remind you of who you are." That night I lay awake in the dark, listening to Travis's steady breathing. The glow of his phone lit his face while he texted someone he thought I couldn't see. I imagined the gala in vivid detail, the way Patricia Rothschild would air kiss him at the entrance, the way Amber Lawson, his secretary with perfume too expensive for her salary, would hover by his side like a shadow dressed in silk. And me? In his version of the story, I simply didn't exist. But erasure can be a dangerous choice, because sometimes, when you cross out someone's name, you create a blank space they can fill with something far stronger than silence. I decided then I would not stay erased. Morning arrived like it always did. The espresso machine hissed like a living creature, filling our marble kitchen with the scent of beans flown in from somewhere Travis pretended to care about when clients asked. He never actually remembered where the coffee came from, only the price per pound, because in his vocabulary, numbers mattered more than names. I moved through the motions, warming the Venetian cups his mother insisted were heirlooms, measuring the grind to the second. This was the theater of our marriage. He was the director. I was the unseen stagehand making sure his performance went smoothly. Travis appeared in the doorway, already wearing his cufflinks, scrolling through market reports on his phone. He didn't look at me when he said, "I'll be meeting with Marcus and Chen after the gala. Don't wait up." I placed the tiny porcelain cup in his hand, careful not to spill a drop. He drank without thanks, without acknowledgement, like a king tasting the sacrifice of his subjects. The only sound was the muted clink of crystal against marble. By 7:15, I had slipped out of our penthouse into the world that still felt like mine. Lincoln Elementary was less than 20 minutes away, but it might as well have been another planet. The moment I walked into my classroom, 28 desks in their crooked rows, bulletin boards plastered with multiplication tables and stick figure families, I felt oxygen return to my lungs. Mrs. Mitchell, Sophia, my 8-year-old firecracker, barreled into my legs, clutching a drawing that looked suspiciously like me riding a dragon. Behind her, Michael waved a math worksheet where every number was written backward, proud of his rebellion. Here, I wasn't an embarrassment. I wasn't an accessory. I was their teacher, their storyteller, the person who laughed at bad jokes and clapped when someone finally remembered their sevens times table. At lunch, I sat with Janet, my colleague of 15 years, who had perfected the art of reading me with one glance. She speared a piece of cafeteria lettuce with her plastic fork. "You look tired, Sav. Everything okay at home?" I hesitated. "How do you explain that your husband has surgically removed you from his public life as though you're a tumor he can't quite admit exists?" Instead, I said, "Travis has the investor gala this week. I'm not going." Janet raised one eyebrow. Not going or not invited? The silence between us answered for me. "You know, she said gently. "The kids made a birthday card for you last year out of construction paper and glitter. I saw you cry reading it. That was more real than any of his galas will ever be." I smiled, but the sting in my throat betrayed me. She was right. My students gave me glitter and chaos, and unconditional affection. Travis gave me erasure. Driving home that evening, I passed the Riverside Country Club, its hedges trimmed into perfect soldiers, guarding a world that never accepted me. I thought about the upcoming gala, the laughter, the expensive wine, the way the wives would whisper behind manicured hands while pretending to admire each other's jewelry. I imagined the moment they noticed my absence, and nodded knowingly, as though Travis had finally corrected a social mistake. In the rearview mirror, I caught sight of myself, hair pulled back hastily, lipstick faded from the morning. Not glamorous, not polished, but real. For a brief, dangerous moment, I whispered to my reflection, maybe I don't need his world at all. Still, the thought of being erased gnawed at me like a rat behind the walls. My grandmother's emerald earrings waited in my jewelry box, cool and steady, whispering courage through memory. They reminded me that survival wasn't about fitting into someone else's table. It was about building your own. I didn't know then how literal that would become. The invitation came folded into an ivory envelope, its edges sharp enough to slice skin. The Harrington Charity Luncheon, printed in gold leaf. Travis left it on the kitchen counter like a casual afterthought, but the truth was in the way his pen had already scrawled +1 guest, Savannah Mitchell, in the RSVP line. "Wear the black Armani," he said over his shoulder that morning, his tie perfectly knotted, his cologne filling the marble kitchen like smoke. "Don't embarrass me this time. Embarrass him." The word echoed in my skull. Not support me, not be there with me, only don't embarrass me. By the time I arrived at the Harrington ballroom, I already felt the weight of invisible judgment. White roses filled crystal vases, their fragrance thick and cloying, as though wealth itself could be distilled into scent. Women in dresses that cost more than my car clustered near the bar, their laughter pitched just loud enough to carry. Patricia Rothschild saw me first. Her smile flickered across her face like a light bulb about to burn out. "Savannah, how lovely you could join us," she said, brushing air kisses near my cheeks. "That dress, so practical." Practical. The word landed like a dart. I had chosen it carefully. A deep navy wrap dress from Nordstrom Rack, tailored enough to look intentional, but not desperate. But in her tone, practical became code for cheap. Jennifer Cross chimed in, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. "It's refreshing to see someone not obsessed with labels, isn't it, Patricia?" Their laughter overlapped like a duet, and I felt heat rise along my collar. I forced a smile, clutching my grandmother's emerald earrings like talismans. The waiter arrived with a bottle of Burgundy. Patricia's hand trembled just enough for the wine to arc across the table, splashing directly onto my lap. Gasps circled the room like a ripple in water. "Oh, dear," Patricia exclaimed, pressing napkins against me with theatrical urgency. "I'm simply dreadful with stemware." The pressure of her hands drove the stain deeper into the fabric. Burgundy spread like blood across my dress, climbing upward in jagged shapes. Jennifer leaned in, her voice sugar-coated venom. "I have some gym clothes in my car. Designer, of course. They might work in a pinch." Laughter again, soft but razor-sharp. Eyes from every table turned to watch me writhe under their performance of sympathy. Some smirked, a few pitied, but none intervened. I excused myself to the bathroom, holding the ruined fabric away from my body. Inside the stall, I sat fully clothed on the toilet, staring at the stain that bloomed across my lap like a map of humiliation. The fluorescent light made it look almost purple, grotesque and permanent. Through the thin door, I heard Patricia's voice carry from the hallway. "Poor thing. Travis really did marry his charity case, didn't he? You can dress them up, but breeding always shows." Jennifer's giggle followed. She actually suggested a fundraiser for public school teachers last month, as if that's what philanthropy is for. My throat tightened until swallowing felt like knives. I stayed in that stall for 20 minutes, long after the stain had cooled and clung to my skin like shame itself. When I finally returned to the ballroom, Travis barely looked up from his conversation with Marcus. "Patricia can be clumsy," he said, when I whispered what had happened. His eyes flicked to the stain, then back to his wine. "Next time, maybe wear something less prone to showing spills." Less prone to showing spills, as though humiliation were a design flaw in my wardrobe. Not in his world. The rest of the luncheon passed in a blur. I couldn't taste the salmon served on porcelain plates. I couldn't focus on the speeches about legacies and investments. All I could feel was the cold spread of wine seeping into my skin, a brand of inferiority I couldn't wash away. Driving home, I rolled down the windows despite the chill. The city blurred past in streaks of light, but I couldn't outrun the words that clung like perfume. Charity case, breeding shows. Don't embarrass me. At home, I peeled off the ruined dress and dropped it into the trash. But the stain remained, on my skin, in my memory, etched into the walls of my marriage. That night, lying beside Travis as he snored softly, I realized humiliation had become the currency of our relationship. He spent it freely, and I was the account he believed would never run dry. He was wrong. And the migraine began in the middle of fourth period, right as Michael was loudly insisting that the number 8 looked like a snowman. By the time the dismissal bell rang, the pain was pounding so violently that every fluorescent light in the hallway felt like a knife. I drove home, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only solid thing tethering me to earth. When I stepped into the penthouse, silence greeted me. Travis's car wasn't in the garage. According to him, he was in Boston for a client meeting, a detail he'd repeated twice over breakfast, as if rehearsed. I carried his suits from the dry cleaner into our bedroom, planning only to hang them before collapsing into bed. That's when it happened. A slip of paper fluttered from his jacket pocket and landed at my feet. A receipt. Not just any receipt. Le Bernardin. The date. Yesterday. The time. 8:47 p.m. The items. Oysters, champagne, chocolate soufflé, for 2. The soufflé mocked me the most. Travis always said dessert was indulgent, unnecessary, for people who didn't understand moderation. Yet here it was, ordered and enjoyed with someone who wasn't me. My hands shook as I held the receipt. I lifted the collar of the same jacket. That's when I saw it. A lipstick mark. Plum-colored, glossy. Not coral, like my grandmother's shade. Not nude, like the tones I wore to avoid his criticism. This was deliberate. A signature scrawled in pigment across fabric, daring me to notice. Then came the perfume. Musky, expensive, foreign. Not mine. The scent clung to the fibers like an accusation, filling my nostrils until nausea rose in my throat. I dropped the jacket as though it had burned me. My knees buckled. The carpet rushed up, and I sat there with the receipt trembling in my hand, my vision tunneling. After minutes, or maybe hours, I forced myself to stand. My body moved on instinct. I pulled out my phone and photographed everything. The receipt, the lipstick stain, the faint shimmer of perfume lingering in the fabric. I created a hidden folder labeled tax documents, a place I knew Travis would never search. Then, as carefully as if I were restoring a crime scene, I slipped the receipt back into his pocket and hung the suit in the closet, aligning the hangers just so. Only when the evidence was safely preserved did I allow the sickness to overwhelm me. I stumbled to the guest bathroom, fell to my knees, and vomited until nothing but bile remained. My body rejected what my mind was still unwilling to accept. When Travis returned that night, he kissed my forehead. His lips were warm, his breath tinged with whiskey. "Long day," he murmured, shrugging off his coat. Boston was exhausting. Presentations went late, but it was worth it. He sat at the table while I served him dinner. Chicken roasted with rosemary, the way he liked. I smiled, nodded, said all the right words. He even complimented me. "Perfectly seasoned," he said, oblivious to the storm clawing beneath my skin. But later, lying beside him in the dark, I stared at the ceiling, wide awake. His breathing was steady, content. Mine was shallow, ragged. Every night after that became a battlefield. Sleep eluded me. I lay frozen, listening to him type quietly in his study, or murmur into his phone, claiming to be on late calls with clients. My eyes burned, my body ached, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. One night at 2 a.m., I rose from bed and padded into his home office. The room smelled faintly of cedar and arrogance. The filing cabinet waited like a locked vault, but the key was exactly where I knew it would be, tucked into the back of his desk drawer, hidden in plain sight. I opened the cabinet and pulled out a folder labeled Insurance. Inside, beneath policy forms and statements, was the document I'd signed on the morning of our wedding, the prenuptial agreement. I remembered that day vividly, my dress hanging in the hotel closet, my hands shaking as Travis's lawyer assured me it was a formality. He'd skimmed the pages, pointing to signature lines, dismissing my questions with legal jargon I didn't understand. It's standard, Savannah. Just protecting both parties. Nothing to worry about. Now, with only the glow of my phone flashlight, I read every word. Most of it was exactly what I feared. Clauses protecting his assets, shielding him from any division that might leave him vulnerable. But buried in subsection 7b, page 12, I found something unexpected. The moral turpitude clause. Any party found guilty of financial crimes, adultery, with documented evidence, or actions that brought public disgrace to the marriage, would forfeit all protections under the agreement. My breath caught. It was as if Travis himself had written me a weapon, never imagining I'd hold it. He assumed moral failing could only come from me, the small-town teacher unworthy of his world. He never considered that his own arrogance, his own appetite for excess, could trigger his downfall. I sat on the carpet of his office, the claws burning into my retinas. The evidence on my phone was already enough to prove adultery, and if I kept looking deeper, if I pulled at the threads of his finances, his secret meetings, who knew what else I might uncover? The thought terrified me, but it also lit something else, something I hadn't felt in years: power. When I finally crept back into bed, Travis stirred. "Couldn't sleep?" he mumbled, half-conscious. "No," I whispered, staring at the ceiling. "But I will." The invitation to the Albany Teachers Conference arrived weeks earlier, but I'd nearly tossed it in the recycling bin. Conferences meant windowless hotel ballrooms, lukewarm coffee, and keynote speakers who believed PowerPoint transitions were the height of showmanship. But Travis insisted I go. "It'll be good for you to engage," he said, his tone making engage sound like a hobby for children. "Besides, the gala is Tuesday night, and you'll just be bored. Bored. As if witnessing my own erasure were tedious rather than devastating. So I went. The conference was exactly what I expected. Fluorescent lights humming overhead. Carpet patterned with geometric shapes designed to hide stains. 1,000 teachers clutching tote bags with inspirational quotes. I wore my sensible flats and my cardigan with a coffee stain on the cuff, the one my students teased me about. For once, I didn't care. During lunch break, I sat with my colleague Marie, grateful for the blandness of cafeteria sandwiches. That's when she introduced me to her sister. "This is Rachel," Marie said, motioning to the woman sliding into the seat across from me. "She's visiting from Boston." Rachel wasn't like the other women here. While we slouched under the weight of laminated name tags, she sat straight-backed, eyes sharp, her black blazer crisp, as though it had been ironed moments ago. Where most people's gazes skim politely, hers pinned me like a specimen under glass. "So," she said without preamble, "you've been teaching 8 years at Lincoln Elementary?" Yes." I blinked. 3rd grade. Her gaze softened, but only slightly. "You look exhausted." The bluntness startled me. No one in Travis's world ever spoke plainly. Every comment came lacquered in varnish, layered with subtext. Rachel's words were sandpaper, rough, undeniable. I laughed weakly. "That obvious. When's the last time you slept through the night?" she pressed. I opened my mouth to lie, then shut it again. The truth spilled out before I could stop it. 4 months ago. Rachel and Marie exchanged a glance. Then Rachel slid a business card across the table. The letters were simple, no flourish. Rachel Adler, forensic accountant specializing in divorce and financial investigations. My hand hesitated over the card. My pulse roared in my ears. Divorce, investigations. The words felt radioactive. My throat tightened. "I'm not." Rachel's eyes never wavered. "Knowledge is power," she said quietly. "And sometimes power is the only thing that lets you sleep." For the rest of the conference, the card burned in my wallet. I kept touching it through the fabric, my fingers trembling as if afraid it might disappear. 3 days later, during lunch break at school, I sat in my car watching my 3rd graders chase a soccer ball across the playground. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might bruise my ribs. Then, with a breath that tasted like rust, I dialed the number. Rachel Adler. My voice cracked. "I need help understanding my finances." There was a pause, but no surprise. "Coffee shop on Elm Street. After school. Bring your last 3 bank statements if you can do it safely." That word again. Safely. When the final bell rang, I drove home on autopilot, praying Travis's schedule hadn't shifted. He was at racquetball with Marcus. I had exactly 40 minutes. My hands shook as I rifled through his filing cabinet, pulling statements, photocopying documents, snapping pictures with my phone. Numbers blurred into chaos. Deposits I didn't recognize. withdrawals that didn't match our lifestyle, transfers to accounts I'd never seen. I stuffed the copies into my bag, just as the garage door rumbled. My heart leapt to my throat. I shoved the folder back, closed the cabinet, and plastered on a smile. "You're home early." He barely noticed. Sweat damp, reeking of cologne and victory, he headed straight for the shower. At the Elm Street Cafe, Rachel was already waiting. She ordered me a large coffee with extra sugar before I even sat down. "You look like you need it." I slid the statements across the table, my hands clammy. "I don't understand any of this." She scanned them quickly, her expression hardening. "This withdrawal here, $8,000, labeled as client entertainment. But look at the date. It matches this charge at the St. Regis Hotel. Presidential suite, champagne, room service for 2. My stomach turned. "He said he was at a conference in Miami that weekend." Rachel didn't flinch. "Interesting conference." Her fingers flew over her laptop keyboard, pulling up financial databases I couldn't begin to decipher. "He's moving money, transfers between accounts that don't belong to you. To anyone you know?" I shook my head, the world tilting. "He's spending about $12,000 a month on someone who isn't you," she said finally, her voice flat with professional certainty. "That's more than your teaching salary. He's funding an entire parallel life." I excused myself to the bathroom before the tears broke free. Staring at my reflection in the cracked cafe mirror, I barely recognized the woman staring back. Hollow eyes, trembling mouth. When I returned, Rachel slid a pamphlet across the table. "You need a credit card in your own name. Secured if necessary. Build your history. Keep documenting. Every receipt, every humiliation, every charge that doesn't make sense. Don't tell him. Not yet." I clutched the pamphlet like a life raft. "What if he finds out?" Her gaze pinned me again. "Then you'll already have the evidence you need. But if you wait too long, he'll use evidence against you." The cafe buzzed around us with ordinary conversations. Students debating exams, an old couple sharing pie. But at our small table, my life had just cracked open. As I drove home, the weight of what I carried pressed against me. Copies of his betrayals, numbers that told a story of theft and deceit, the beginnings of a power he didn't know I had. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving his world, I was preparing to fight it. The red dress had been waiting in the back of my closet for years. I bought it before Travis and I married, before I knew that every clothing choice would become a negotiation, a coded message about his success. It wasn't designer. It wasn't Armani. It was mine. Knee-length, soft fabric that swayed when I moved, chosen simply because it made me feel alive. The first time I wore it, he'd smiled. "You look radiant," he said then, back when his compliments were still currency I trusted. But by the second year of our marriage, he dismissed it. Too bright, too loud. Not sophisticated enough, so I folded it away, exiling it with the other pieces of myself he decided didn't belong. Now, as I pulled it from the hanger, I could almost hear my grandmother's voice. "Wear what makes you brave, not what makes you acceptable." On my dresser, her emerald earrings glinted in the lamplight. They were small, almost modest compared to the diamonds that Patricia and Jennifer flaunted, but they carried weight beyond price. My grandmother wore them through the Depression, through my grandfather's death, through chemo appointments when her hair fell in clumps, but her dignity never wavered. She told me, "These are for brave girls. When you wear them, you carry every fight I survived." I pressed the earrings into my palm until the edges left faint imprints in my skin. I would need their strength. And Rachel and I met again 2 nights later at the same cafe. She carried her laptop like a weapon, her hair pulled into a no-nonsense knot. "You've started your own credit line?" she asked, skipping pleasantries. "Yes, Teachers Credit Union. They approved me for a secured card." She nodded once. "Good. Keep using it. Small purchases always paid off. It's not about the money. It's about proof you can stand alone." She spread spreadsheets across the table, columns of numbers I could barely comprehend. "He's not just cheating, Savannah. He's laundering. Small amounts, below reporting thresholds, siphoned from multiple client accounts. At scale, it's embezzlement." The words hit like blows. "How much?" She tapped a total at the bottom. $2.3 million over 5 years. My stomach turned. From who? Mostly elderly clients, widows, retirees, people who trust him not to ask questions. That's the kind of theft prosecutors salivate over. I pressed a hand to my mouth. "Mrs. Morrison had sent us Christmas cards, handwritten in shaky script thanking Travis for managing her late husband's estate. She'd baked me lemon squares once, and he was bleeding her dry behind closed doors. Rachel's gaze was unflinching. This isn't just about you anymore. This is bigger. But that works in your favor. Financial crimes, documented adultery, emotional abuse. They all trigger that clause in your prenup. When it breaks, he loses everything. Everything. For years, Travis had positioned me as the dependent, the burden, the woman who should be grateful for scraps of attention. But the paper he forced me to sign on my wedding day had a trapdoor he never imagined I'd find. I thought about the gala, the event he'd meticulously blocked me from attending. 17 names on a list, mine missing. His perfect evening of power and performance, free of the woman he labeled an embarrassment. A slow, dangerous idea began to form. What if, I said carefully, I don't stay erased? What if I show up anyway? Rachel's lips twitched into something almost like a smile. Then make sure you don't show up alone. And that night at home, I tested him. Over dinner, I cut my chicken with deliberate precision. I've been thinking, I said casually. Some of the parents have asked about tutoring. Maybe I'll take on a few students after school. Extra spending money. The reaction was instantaneous. His fork froze halfway to his mouth. A flush crept up his neck. My wife does not take second jobs like some suburban housewife desperate for pocket change. What would people think? That I can't provide for my own family? It was just a thought, I murmured. I enjoy teaching. The answer is no. He set down his wine glass hard enough to make the liquid tremble. You don't understand how things work in my world. These small decisions reflect on me, on my ability to manage my household. That's why I'm bringing Vivian in to help you look appropriate for the gala. You'll wear what she tells you. You'll act how she instructs you. I've invited the right people. The least you can do is not embarrass me. He stormed away, leaving his plate half-eaten. But his rage only confirmed what Rachel had been teaching me. Travis's control was brittle. His entire world was theater. Appearances, masks, performances, and theater collapses when someone changes the script. 3 days before the gala, Vivian arrived at our door. She was an emissary from my mother-in-law, armed with garment racks and a makeup case the size of a coffin. Her assistant wheeled in gowns that glimmered like cages, dresses designed to turn women into ornaments. Vivian circled me, her eyes cataloging every flaw. We'll need foundation garments to smooth these lines, perhaps subtle fillers for balance, and definitely work around the eyes. Mature skin requires intervention. I was 34. She tugged, pinched, clicked her tongue. By the time they left, promising to return with more suitable options, I felt scraped hollow. I stumbled into my bedroom and opened my jewelry box. The red dress lay folded on the chair. My grandmother's earrings gleamed. I held them to my ears, whispering to my reflection, for my brave girl. And in that moment, a decision solidified like steel. I would wear the red dress. I would wear the emeralds. And I would not arrive alone, because erasure is one thing, defiance is another. And Travis Mitchell had no idea how much power I was about to reclaim. The night of the gala arrived wrapped in velvet silence. The city outside our penthouse shimmered with lights, but inside the atmosphere was brittle. Travis had already left hours earlier, dressed in his tuxedo like a man marching to coronation. He didn't want me there. He'd erased me from the guest list, curated his kingdom without me. But what he didn't know was that I had my own invitation now. It had come through a chain of whispered introductions, one that began with Rachel and ended with a handshake in a quiet cafe 2 blocks from the plaza. His name was David Whitmore, though most people called him the Whitmore Fund. Billionaire investor, kingmaker, the kind of man Travis dreamed of impressing, the kind of man who could make or break reputations with a single nod. And tonight, I would walk in beside him. But I dressed slowly, deliberately. The red dress slipped over my skin like armor. My grandmother's emerald earrings glinted in the mirror, small but defiant, their weight a reminder that strength doesn't need to scream. It just needs to endure. Emma, my sister, had come over to steady me. She zipped the dress, her hands warm against my back. Are you sure about this? I've been erased long enough, I said, staring at my reflection. Tonight, he'll remember I exist. Her eyes shone with something between pride and fear. Then burn that room down. At 7:45, a black car arrived downstairs. David Whitmore stepped out with the ease of a man accustomed to red carpets, not sidewalks. He was older than Travis, silver hair gleaming, presence commanding, but his eyes, sharp, calculating, softened when he saw me. Ready? he asked. As I'll ever be. He offered me his arm, and together we stepped into the night. The ballroom at the Harrington Hotel glittered with excess. Crystal chandeliers dripped light over tables arranged with surgical precision. Men in tuxedos shook hands too firmly. Women sparkled in gowns that whispered of private fittings and personal stylists. At the entrance, the maitre d' blinked when he saw me. His gaze darted to his seating chart, confusion clouding his professional mask. But when David Whitmore introduced me, "This is Savannah Turner, my guest tonight," the man straightened instantly. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. Right this way." The room hushed as we entered. Heads turned. Whispered ripples spread faster than champagne bubbles. Travis, standing near the center with Marcus and Patricia, froze mid-laugh, his eyes locked on me, widening as though he'd seen a ghost walk through the door. I watched his throat tighten, the flush rising beneath his collar. His perfect evening had just fractured. "Savannah," he said finally, his voice strained. "What are you—" "Good evening, Travis." My smile was calm, measured. "I hope you don't mind. Mr. Whitmore invited me." David placed a steady hand on my back, his tone smooth. "Your wife was kind enough to share some insights with me recently. I insisted she accompany me tonight. A woman of her intelligence doesn't belong on the sidelines." The words landed like grenades. Around us, the circle of guests leaned in, curious. Patricia's painted lips parted in surprise. Amber Lawson's hand faltered as she adjusted her neckline. Perfume thick in the air. Travis's jaw tightened. He tried to recover, his smile brittle. "Of course, I didn't realize you two—" "We met by chance," David interrupted, sipping his champagne. "Fortunate, really. I find Savannah refreshingly candid, a rare quality in this circle." The implication was clear. In a room full of masks, I was the one seen as genuine. Dinner began. 17 guests, 18 now, arranged along the gleaming table. Travis sat at the head, but for the first time, he didn't control the narrative. David Whitmore commanded attention with effortless authority, and by his side, I was no longer invisible. As the first course arrived, caviar on porcelain spoons, Patricia attempted her usual cruelty. "Savannah, dear, I didn't know you were such close friends with Mr. Whitmore." I held her gaze, my voice even. "Sometimes, Patricia, the people you overlook turn out to matter most." The table murmured. Patricia's smirk faltered. Travis tried to steer the conversation back to himself. He launched into a story about the firm's expansion, his tone inflated with self-importance. But David cut him off smoothly. "Expansion, yes. Though one wonders how sustainable certain strategies are. I've been reviewing some interesting numbers lately." Travis's glass slipped slightly in his hand. His smile froze. "Numbers?" David leaned back, unbothered. "Patterns, really. Funds moving in unusual ways. Transfers that suggest more performance than reality. Fascinating to analyze." The silence that followed was suffocating. Travis's friends shifted uncomfortably. Amber's phone slipped into her lap, her fingers frantic. Patricia's diamonds caught the light, but her confidence dimmed. I touched my grandmother's earrings lightly, grounding myself in the storm. I wasn't speaking much, but I didn't need to. My presence, my ally, my refusal to stay erased, those were louder than any words. "Mindset." Now by dessert, Travis was unraveling. His laugh came too sharp, his stories too long, his hands fidgeting with his cufflinks. He kept glancing at me, then at David, then back again, as if trying to calculate the math of betrayal. When the soufflé arrived, perfectly risen, dusted with sugar, I lifted my spoon with deliberate grace. The last time Travis ordered soufflé, it wasn't with me. Tonight, I tasted it slowly, savoring the sweetness of poetic symmetry. Travis's hand slammed onto the table, startling the waitstaff. "Excuse me," he muttered, rising abruptly. "I need some air." He left the room, his retreat as dramatic as his entrance had once been. But this time, no one followed him. All eyes turned instead toward me, toward the woman who wasn't supposed to exist. And for the first time in years, I felt seen. And the ballroom hummed with forced conversation after Travis stormed out. Silverware clinked against porcelain. Laughter bubbled nervously, but the atmosphere had shifted. The air was charged, brittle, as if everyone sensed they had just witnessed the beginning of an unraveling, but didn't know where to look. David Whitmore swirled the last of his wine calmly, unfazed. "Such intensity," he murmured, almost to himself, though loud enough for the table to hear. I always find it telling when someone speaks most forcefully at the very moment they feel least in control. Patricia let out a nervous trill of laughter. Travis does have a temper. David's gaze flicked toward her, sharp and cool. A temper is forgivable. A lack of transparency, less so. The word hung in the air. Transparency. In a room full of investors, attorneys, and spouses trained in the art of appearances, that single word carried weight heavier than any insult. Transparency was currency. Lack of it was poison. I sat quietly, the red fabric of my dress glowing under the chandeliers. Every pair of eyes stole glances at me, trying to measure how I had walked in beside the very man Travis had been courting for years. I kept my smile small, serene, my grandmother's earrings cool against my skin. Amber Lawson, his secretary, leaned forward, her perfume clouding the air. "Mr. Whitmore," she said, too brightly. "I'm sure Travis simply stepped out to take a call. He's been under tremendous stress with the firm's expansion." David raised a single eyebrow. "Stress often reveals more truth than calm ever does, don't you think?" Amber flushed, retreating into silence. And minutes later, Travis returned. His hair was mussed, his tie slightly loosened, but his mask was back in place. He forced a smile as he slid into his chair. "Apologies. Urgent matter." "Of course," David said smoothly. "We were just discussing transparency." The word struck again, a carefully aimed dart. Travis chuckled too loudly, reaching for his glass. "Transparency is vital, of course. At Mitchell and Sterling, we pride ourselves on absolute integrity." David leaned forward, folding his hands. His tone was casual, but his eyes gleamed with surgical precision. "Integrity. Interesting. Because I've been reviewing certain filings lately. Performance numbers, expense reports, fascinating patterns." The table stilled. Even the waitstaff seemed to pause. Travis's smile faltered. "Patterns?" "Yes." David tapped his glass lightly. "For example, client entertainment charges that align curiously with personal expenditures. Hotel stays that overlap with supposed business trips. Transfers to accounts with little explanation." A ripple of unease passed through the guests. Marcus shifted in his seat, suddenly fascinated by his bread plate. Patricia sipped her champagne too quickly, the bubbles catching in her throat. Travis's face darkened. "I'm not sure what you're implying." David's voice remained calm, almost gentle. "I don't imply, Mr. Mitchell. I observe, and what I've observed suggests someone is playing a dangerous game with other people's money." Silence slammed into the table like a gavel. Travis set his glass down with enough force to make it ring. "Are you accusing me of misconduct?" David didn't flinch. "I'm simply saying that numbers tell stories, and the story your numbers tell is inconsistent with the one you perform at dinners like this." The word perform hit like a slap. Around the table, heads turned toward me, then back to Travis. For years, he had paraded me as the weak link, the charity case, the embarrassment. Tonight, with a few precise sentences, David shifted the spotlight. The cracks in Travis's polished facade were suddenly visible to everyone, and Patricia attempted to smooth the moment, her voice falsely bright. "Well, surely this isn't the place for such technical discussions. We're here to celebrate." David's smile was thin. "Celebration without truth is theater, and I have little patience for theater that costs people their livelihoods." Travis's jaw tightened. He looked at me then, really looked at me, as if only now realizing I was not a prop in this scene, but a participant. His eyes narrowed, fury flashing beneath the surface. I held his gaze, calm, unflinching. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't look away. New dessert plates were cleared, coffee poured. Conversation limped forward, broken by silences too heavy to ignore. Every so often David would drop another line, measured and deliberate. "Trust," he mused at one point, "is built in silence but destroyed in spectacle. Numbers don't lie, though men often do. Erasure of a partner's presence says more about a man than any balance sheet." Each statement landed like a hammer on Travis's carefully constructed image. By the time the evening ended, guests were already whispering in corners. Marcus avoided Travis's eyes. Patricia made an excuse about an early morning. Amber clung to her phone, typing furiously. Her confidence dimmed. Travis tried to laugh it off, clapping David on the shoulder as though nothing had happened. "We'll schedule a meeting next week. Go over everything in detail," he said, his voice too high, too eager. David only smiled politely. "We'll see." Then outside. The night air was cool against my skin. David's driver opened the car door, but before I stepped in, He turned to me. "You know," he said quietly, "men like your husband always believe they're untouchable. But they forget. The higher the tower, the more spectacular the fall." I swallowed hard, the truth of it heavy in my chest. "And when he falls?" David's eyes gleamed. "Make sure you're standing where everyone can see you. That's the only way they'll remember whose strength brought him down." As the car pulled away, I looked back through the hotel's glittering windows. Inside, Travis still stood among the remnants of his empire, smiling too widely, his mask slipping with every second. And for the first time, I felt the balance of power shift. Not in whispers, not in secrecy, but in public, in front of everyone. The exposure had begun. Bye. And the morning after the gala, I woke to silence so thick it felt like a verdict. No messages from Travis, no perfunctory texts about meetings or late nights at the club. His absence was louder than his presence had ever been. Instead, my phone buzzed with something new. 3 missed calls from Patricia, 1 from Marcus, and a text from Amber that simply read, "We need to talk." I didn't answer any of them. Instead, I met Rachel at my sister Emma's house. We spread papers across the dining room table. Bank statements, credit card records, screenshots of emails, receipts for dinners in cities where Travis swore he'd been at client meetings. The surface was buried in evidence, every piece a crack in his carefully polished empire. Rachel tapped her pen against one document. "This transfer here, $15,000 labeled as consulting fees. But the receiving account? Cayman Islands. And look, 2 weeks later, nearly the same amount reappears in his personal brokerage, disguised as investment gains." Emma's husband, Mike, leaned against the doorway, arms crossed. "That's wire fraud." Rachel nodded. "And if we can map a pattern, the SEC and IRS will tear him apart. But we need to be precise. Sloppy evidence won't hold." I leaned forward, the red dress from last night still folded neatly in my bag, the scent of David Whitmore's cologne lingering faintly in the fabric. "What about the prenup? Does this count?" Rachel flipped through her notes, her expression grim but certain. "Adultery documented, yes. Financial crimes, yes. Emotional abuse. On video, thanks to Henry at the restaurant. Savannah, you're sitting on a trifecta. He wrote his own destruction into that contract." Emma reached for my hand, her grip firm. "Then let's make sure he can't wriggle out." And the counterattack began quietly. First, Rachel drafted anonymous packets of evidence, 1 for the SEC, 1 for the IRS, 1 for the state attorney general. We sealed them in plain envelopes, our fingerprints hidden under latex gloves. Each packet contained only enough to spark suspicion, not overwhelm. Rachel's strategy was surgical. Feed them breadcrumbs. Let their own investigators dig. It'll carry more weight when it's confirmed internally. Second, we reached out to allies Travis didn't know he'd created. Henry, the maitre d' at Chateau Blanc, had already sworn he'd provide security footage of the birthday dinner, where Travis left me humiliated with a $4,000 bill. Margaret Chin, Bradley Sterling's ex-wife, contacted me through Rachel. She had recordings of Travis coaching Bradley on how to gaslight her during their divorce. "Men like him recycle cruelty," Margaret said when we met in a cramped cafe. Her voice was steady, her eyes bright with a fury that had finally found direction. "They think no one compares notes, but I kept everything. And if it helps you, then maybe it helps undo what he did to me." Third, there was David Whitmore. He called me personally 2 days after the gala, his voice low but decisive. "Your husband made enemies long before you walked into that ballroom. All you did was give us permission to stop pretending. You have allies now, Savannah. Use them." It startled me, how simple he made it sound. Alliances forged in whispers and looks across crystal glasses. But I understood. Travis's power had always been borrowed, his reputation propped up by the approval of men like Whitmore. And now, those men had begun to withdraw their support. Meanwhile, Travis unraveled. At first, he tried to play it cool, posting photos with clients on social media, his smile strained but intact. But beneath the facade, panic leaked through. I heard from Janet at school that he'd called the principal, demanding to know why I'd been missing so many days. I hadn't. Rachel and I were careful. Then came the fury. He appeared at Emma's house one evening, pounding on the door, shouting my name. Emma kept the chain latched, her voice firm through the gap. "She doesn't want to see you, Travis. I gave her everything." His voice cracked, raw. "She was nothing before me." I stood at the top of the stairs, hidden in shadow, clutching the banister so hard my knuckles ached. I wanted to scream that he was wrong, that I had been someone before him and would be someone after, but I held my silence, because silence, I realized, was more powerful than fury. He left that night with threats spilling behind him. You think you've won? You have no idea who you're up against. But I did. And more importantly, so did the SEC. 2 weeks later, the investigation began to leak. The New York Journal published a brief piece. Sources indicate federal regulators are reviewing Mitchell and Sterling's filings amid concerns about irregularities in client accounts. It was 2 paragraphs long, buried on page 6. But in Travis's world, even whispers carried the force of earthquakes. Clients began calling. Meetings were canceled. Patricia, who had once smirked at my practical dress, was suddenly too busy to host her usual brunches. And David Whitmore? He pulled his fund's interest in the firm entirely, a move that sent shockwaves through the financial circuit. The message was clear. Travis Mitchell was radioactive. Rachel and I watched it unfold from her apartment, papers spread across her dining table like maps of a battlefield. "This is only the beginning," she said, scrolling through her laptop. "When regulators smell blood, they don't stop. And when your divorce filing lands on the judge's desk, citing adultery, fraud, and public disgrace, the prenup collapses." I exhaled, the weight of years pressing down on me. What if he fights dirty? Rachel's eyes gleamed with steel. Then we fight smarter. Outside, the city pulsed with its usual chaos. Horns blaring, lights flashing, sirens wailing. But inside, for the first time in years, I felt calm. The counterattack was underway, and Travis Mitchell had no idea how fast his tower was about to crumble. The first headline broke on a Wednesday morning. Mitchell and Sterling under federal review. It wasn't front page yet, but it didn't need to be. In Travis's world, perception was currency. The second whispers of investigation appeared in print. The dominoes began to topple. I read the article at the kitchen table of Emma's house. Her daughter's half-eaten cereal bowl pushed aside. The words felt surreal. Alleged irregularities, client complaints, sources close to the matter. It was vague, careful, written like a seed. But seeds, when planted in the right soil, grow fast. By noon, the firm's phones were ringing off the hook, clients demanding explanations, partners scrambling for statements. Marcus left 3 voicemails on my phone, each more frantic than the last. "Savannah, you don't understand what you've started. The FBI was at my house this morning. Do you have any idea? Tell Travis to fix this, now, before we all go down with him." But Travis couldn't fix it, because the rot was already spreading too far, and too many people had seen the cracks. That night, Emma and I sat on her porch, mugs of tea warming our hands. Through the quiet hum of suburban streets, I heard tires screech, and then his Audi appeared at the curb, headlights slicing through the dark. He stumbled from the car, tie loosened, eyes bloodshot. Rage and desperation rolled off him in waves. "Savannah!" His voice shattered the calm. "Get out here. Now!" Emma rose, blocking the front steps. "She doesn't want to see you. This is kidnapping." His fists pounded the railing. "She's my wife." "No," Emma said, her voice like ice. "She's my sister, and she's not yours to control anymore." I stood just inside the door, hidden by shadows, watching the man who had once seemed untouchable unravel on my sister's porch like a drunk shouting at ghosts. His words were frantic, jagged, threats about ruining my career, about exposing me as vindictive, about how I'd never survive without him. But even in his fury, I saw it. The cracks of fear. He was losing. He knew it. Finally, Emma called the police. The sound of the siren sent him scrambling back into his car. He tore away from the curb, tires screaming, leaving the smell of burnt rubber behind. I sank into a chair, my whole body trembling. Emma placed a hand on my shoulder. "He's not a god, Sav. He's just a man who thinks shouting loud enough makes him powerful. But the louder he shouts, the smaller he becomes." And the following week, the fall accelerated. The SEC announced a formal inquiry into Mitchell and Sterling's accounts. The firm tried to spin it as routine compliance review, but no one believed them. Clients began pulling portfolios. Within days, millions were gone. The New York Journal ran another piece, this one with quotes from former employees who described unethical practices and a culture of concealment. I didn't need to wonder who the sources were. Henry had called me the night before, his voice steady. You deserve to know. Several of my staff gave statements. We couldn't stay silent. Even Patricia Rothschild, queen of appearances, turned. She released a carefully worded statement distancing her family from any improprieties at Mitchell and Sterling. Translation: she'd abandoned him. At the country club, his membership was quietly suspended. The whispers I heard from Rachel's contacts painted the scene vividly. Travis arriving for a racquetball match, only to be told at the desk that his privileges were temporarily unavailable. Members watching as he argued with staff, his voice rising, his veneer cracking. For years, he had weaponized exclusion against me. Now he was the one barred at the door. The climax came on a gray Monday morning. I was in my classroom, leading a spelling test, when Janet burst in, her eyes wide. "Savannah, turn on the news." On the tiny TV in the teacher's lounge, I saw it. FBI agents carrying boxes from Mitchell and Sterling's office. Computers, files, stacks of documents. Cameras flashed. Employees huddled on the sidewalk, faces pale. And there, in the middle of it all, was Travis. He wasn't in handcuffs, not yet, but the image was damning. His jaw clenched, his eyes darting, his suit rumpled. He looked smaller, diminished, swallowed by the spectacle of his own downfall. The anchor's voice was clinical, almost gleeful. Sources allege embezzlement from elderly clients, fraudulent filings, and misuse of partnership funds. Investigations are ongoing. Around me, teachers whispered, their eyes flicking toward me with a mix of shock and sympathy. I held my chin high, my voice steady. "Back to class, everyone." But inside, something seismic shifted. The man who once erased me from guest lists was now being erased from his own empire, live on national television. And that evening, Rachel arrived at Emma's with a bottle of champagne and a folder. "Preliminary findings from the investigation," she said, setting the papers on the table. "They've already frozen several accounts. His assets are tied up, and clients are lining up for restitution." Emma poured 3 glasses. "So what does this mean for Savannah?" Rachel smiled for the first time in weeks. "It means leverage. With adultery, fraud, and public disgrace documented, the prenup's moral turpitude clause voids all protections. He doesn't just lose his shield, he loses his weapons. This divorce will strip him of everything he tried to hoard." I lifted my glass, the bubbles sharp on my tongue. For the first time, the taste of champagne wasn't bitter. It was freedom. Nyoranida. Kaz across the city, Travis sat in his office, or what remained of it, surrounded by empty shelves and silent phones. For years he believed himself untouchable, the architect of power, the man who could control anyone with a glance or a threat. Now he was nothing more than a headline, a cautionary tale. The fall had begun, and it was only the beginning. The first time I saw my maiden name in print again, I cried. It was on a court filing, stamped in blue ink, Turner versus Mitchell. For years, my name had been swallowed by his. Mrs. Travis Mitchell at country club luncheons, Savannah Mitchell on school rosters, Mitchell and spouse on party invitations where I was nothing more than a silent accessory. But now, on crisp legal paper, my name stood first. Strong, separate, mine. Elizabeth Hartley, my attorney, slid the papers across her polished desk with a small, knowing smile. "The judge granted the emergency asset freeze this morning. Between the SEC investigation and the adultery clause in your prenup, this will move quickly. He doesn't have the leverage he thinks he does." I ran my fingers over the embossed seal. Turner. My name. My grandmother's name. The identity I had traded for promises of security and belonging that turned out to be shackles. "Do you want to push for settlement?" Elizabeth asked. "Or take him through the fire?" I looked out her office window at the Manhattan skyline, towers of glass gleaming in the late afternoon sun. For years, those towers symbolized him, his world, his triumphs, his power. But now, I saw them differently. Fragile, reflective, built to impress, but capable of shattering with one crack. "I want him to feel what I felt," I said finally. "Invisible, small, powerless. I want to take back every piece of myself he convinced me to give up." Elizabeth nodded once. "Then we go to war." Reclamation began not in the courtroom but in my classroom. The Monday after the raid, I walked back into Lincoln Elementary. My students had decorated my door with a banner that read, "Welcome back, Miss Turner," in glitter and crooked letters. Sophia launched herself at my legs the moment I stepped inside. Michael raised his hand before blurting, "Did you beat the bad guy?" I laughed, tears stinging my eyes. "Something like that." Their faces lit up. Not because they understood divorce or federal investigations, but because their teacher had come back, whole, present, herself. I realized then that reclamation wasn't just about punishing Travis. It was about rebuilding me, piece by piece. Annoying Haitigain. The second act of reclamation came at Chateau Blanc. It felt strange walking through those gilded doors again, this time in daylight. The chandeliers seemed less intimidating, the marble less suffocating. Henry greeted me with a bow of his head, his voice warm. "Madam Turner, your table is ready." He led me to a quiet corner by the window. The same room where I'd once been humiliated, abandoned with a bill larger than my monthly salary, now transformed into a place of peace. He set down a cup of coffee without my ordering. "This is on the house," he said. "Always." As I sipped, an elderly woman at the next table leaned toward me. "I was here that night," she said softly. "You showed remarkable grace. My husband and I still talk about it." Her husband nodded. "We've been married 53 years. Respect is the foundation." That man, he didn't know what he had. Their words washed over me like balm. For years I'd internalized the idea that my worth was tied to his recognition. Now strangers reminded me that dignity speaks louder than diamonds. I left Chateau Blanc that day not with shame, but with closure. The place of my deepest humiliation had become a stage for my quiet triumph. And reclamation also meant facing him one last time. The conference room at Elizabeth's firm was practical. No marble, no ostentation. Just clean lines and chairs that didn't pretend to be thrones. Travis arrived with 2 lawyers in tow, his once perfect suit wrinkled, his face shadowed with exhaustion. When our eyes met, I felt nothing. Not rage, not longing, just distance. Elizabeth opened with precision. "Given Mr. Mitchell's ongoing federal investigation, we are prepared to proceed with divorce under the moral turpitude clause. My client is entitled to alimony, the marital apartment, and 50% of all legitimate assets. This is non-negotiable." Travis's lawyer bristled. "Generous settlement is possible, but these terms—" Elizabeth cut him off with a laugh sharp as glass. "Generous? Your client committed adultery, fraud, and public humiliation, all documented. The only generosity here is that my client hasn't pursued criminal charges herself." Travis's hand trembled as he signed each page. By the final signature, his name had devolved into a scrawl. He pushed the papers away, his voice barely above a whisper. "You destroyed me." I met his eyes calmly. "No, you destroyed yourself. I just stopped cleaning up the mess." His lawyers guided him out, their faces stiff with the awareness they were backing a sinking ship. The door closed behind them with a finality that echoed in my chest. That night, Emma hosted Sunday dinner. Mike cooked his famous lasagna, filling the house with garlic and warmth. Mia twirled in her dress for her first high school dance, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Aunt Savvy, do I look okay?" she asked, nerves creeping into her voice. I smiled, reaching into my purse. I fastened my grandmother's emerald earrings onto her ears, the stones gleaming against her skin. "These are for brave girls," I whispered. "Tonight they're yours." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really? Because brave girls deserve to know their worth before anyone tries to convince them otherwise." Emma watched us with tears in her eyes. "She's reclaiming everything, one piece at a time." And she was right. Reclamation wasn't just about divorce papers or frozen assets. It was about Sunday dinners that tasted like home, about students who drew me with arms too long but hearts in the right place, about a teenager wearing emerald earrings to her first dance. It was about choosing myself again. And for the first time in years, I felt whole. The day the divorce was finalized, the city felt different. Not louder, not brighter, just clearer, as if I had been living behind glass all those years, and now it had finally shattered. Elizabeth handed me the final papers with a small smile. "Congratulations, Savannah Turner. You're free." The word free echoed in my chest. Heavy, fragile, new. I walked out of the courthouse into the gray afternoon, the air sharp with the smell of rain on concrete. For a moment, I just stood there, watching strangers rush past with umbrellas and briefcases, each living lives I would never know. For the first time in years, mine felt like it was mine again. News of Travis's downfall spread faster than I ever could have orchestrated. The SEC froze accounts. The IRS began audits. Clients filed lawsuits. His name, once synonymous with prestige, became a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails. One night, flipping channels absent-mindedly, I saw him on the news. Grainy footage of him leaving a courthouse, ducking into a black car while reporters shouted questions. His face was pale, his jaw clenched, his eyes haunted. The anchor's voice was calm, clinical. Travis Mitchell, former partner at Mitchell & Sterling, faces multiple allegations of financial misconduct, including wire fraud and elder abuse. Investigations remain ongoing. I watched for a long time, waiting for the sting, but it didn't come. There was no triumph, no bitterness, only distance. He was no longer the man who had humiliated me, or the man I once loved. He was simply a man who built his empire on cruelty, and now it was collapsing around him. And I was no longer standing in the rubble. But my reclamation unfolded in small, unexpected moments. At school, my students asked if Miss Turner was here forever now. I told them yes. They cheered so loudly that the principal popped her head in to check if we were safe. At Emma's house, Mia wore my grandmother's emerald earrings to her school dance and came home radiant, declaring she'd never let a boy tell her who to be. Emma looked at me over the dinner table and whispered, "She learned that from you." At Chateau Blanc, Henry greeted me by name and told me Travis was permanently banned. "We don't serve men who treat women as disposable," he said. The restaurant that once witnessed my humiliation had become a sanctuary, and in my own apartment, the one I kept after the settlement, I painted the walls a shade of warm coral, the same color as my grandmother's lipstick. Every brushstroke felt like carving space that was mine, not borrowed, not dictated. The months later, I returned to the Harrington Hotel, not as someone erased from the guest list, but as a speaker. David Whitmore had invited me to address a foundation gala, this time in my own name. I stood at the podium in a navy dress that I chose because I loved it, my grandmother's emeralds gleaming under the lights. The audience leaned in as I spoke, not about finance or power, but about dignity. I used to believe my worth depended on someone else's approval, I told them. That being chosen, being allowed into certain rooms, gave me value. But I learned the hard way. Rooms don't define you. People don't define you. What defines you is what you carry when the lights go out, when the applause stops, when the door slams shut in your face. What defines you is refusing to let anyone erase you. The room was silent, the kind of silence that means people are listening with their hearts, not just their ears. When the applause finally came, it wasn't for the woman who had once been Mrs. Mitchell. It was for Savannah Turner. And sometimes late at night, I still hear echoes of Travis's voice in my memory. "A woman like you should be grateful I even looked your way." But those words no longer cut. They remind me of how far I've come, because I am grateful that I no longer measure my worth by the gaze of someone who only ever saw me as a reflection of himself. Now, I measure it by the laughter of my students, by the quiet strength of my sister, by the courage I see in my niece's eyes when she wears emerald earrings to a school dance. I measure it by the woman I see in the mirror every morning, a woman who was humiliated, silenced, erased, and who chose to rise anyway. If you've followed my story this far, maybe you've felt a piece of yourself in it. Maybe you've been overlooked, dismissed, or told you weren't enough. Maybe you've had your voice stolen. If so, hear me now. You are not defined by the people who underestimate you. You are not defined by the ones who try to erase you. You are defined by the fire you carry, the resilience you refuse to let go of, the dignity you hold even when someone tries to take it. That is your wealth. That is your inheritance. That is your power. So take it back. Reclaim it. Because no one, no partner, no boss, no so-called friend, can take from you what you refuse to surrender. And if my story meant something to you, if it reminded you of your own strength, I hope you'll share it. Leave a comment about the moment you realized your worth. Subscribe, so you don't miss the stories of others who also refuse to be erased. Together, we can build a community where no one's dignity is negotiable. I was Savannah Mitchell once, but I am Savannah Turner again. And this time, I am not apologizing for existing.